Ever feel like there's this whole other level to books, like a secret code?
Oh, absolutely.
Today we're cracking that code, diving deep into Emile Zola.
Specifically.
His Rougon Court series, those 20 novels. It's like he took a snapshot of 19th century France, all the different lives, the good, the bad.
But here's the twist. We're analyzing them, like, philosophically.
Exactly. We're using Michel Serres' book, Jeux de Saint Moteurs et Circulations.
Oh, interesting choice.
Because in it, he argues Zola wasn't just telling stories. He was building systems, like a scientist, but of society.
And to analyze these systems, he brought in some, shall we say, unexpected tools.
Thermodynamics.
Right. That's usually for, like, engines, not literature.
Exactly. But that's where it gets so cool. Serres says, think about how energy works. It transforms, it flows, sometimes it, explodes.
Okay, I'm seeing it.
Now swap out, like, heat for things like ambition, desire, even violence. That's how Zola structures his narratives, according to Serres.
So it's less about the literal plot and more that these forces are characters themselves.
Driving the action.
I like that. And Zola does give us this huge family tree, right? The Rougon courts.
Each branch, a different social class, all intertwined.
And Serres says this tree isn't just genealogy, it's like the tree of knowledge.
Oh, wow. Yeah, or even like the tree of good and evil from the Bible, showing how ideas, not just genes, flow through society.
It's like instead of just a family saga, he's invented a giant social experiment, and it has these recurring patterns.
And just like in physics, where energy can't be created or destroyed, only transformed.
Serres says, look for these cycles of circulation in Zola.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Bloodlines, money, even just pure desire.
They all build up, transform, and so often.
Catastrophe. It's like that scene in Germinal after the mine explosion.
Oh man, so brutal.
It's not just a plot device, is it? It's this whole buildup of tension.
Like Zola's saying, look what happens. These systems have consequences. It's not even just the miners, right?
No, it's everyone.
The whole community, even future generations. Makes me think of how today something small happens on the other side of the world.
And it impacts us all.
Because of global trade, the internet. It's all so connected. That's at the heart of Zola's work, isn't it?
Serres would say so. He really highlights the recurring motif of bridges.
Bridges.
Think of them as like points of connection, but also crossing over transgression.
Ooh, I like that.
When characters cross those bridges, things happen. Big things. Usually kind of tragic.
Like leaving one state and entering another. Forever changed by it.
Right.
So then the opposite of that would be
isolation. Right. Characters who are alone physically or emotionally.
Stuck on islands, those disconnected spaces in his books.
They meet bad ends, too, a lot of the time. It's like he's linking that isolation to a failure to connect, to create.
Which leads to what?
Madness, sterility, even death. They're outside the system, good or bad. And Serres argues this is key to understanding Zola's whole world.
Connection versus disconnection.
Exactly.
But where does Paris itself fit in? Because it's like another character in these novels.
Right, this bustling, overwhelming force.
Serres picks up on that, too.
That's
especially in The Belly of Paris.
Ah, such a great title for what he's talking about.
How Zola describes La Sauce, the central market.
Like this beating heart, pumping goods, people.
Through its streets, like veins and arteries, it's alive.
And the city itself is hungry.
Consuming. Being consumed. But it's not just food, right?
No, there's hunger for everything. Wealth, pleasure, status.
And just like with too much food?
That consumption can be destructive.
So then each neighborhood, it's like an organ with a function, but part of this one giant.
Organism. I like how you put that. And those bridges, they're the connective tissue.
The pathways for all that energy, those desires, even disease to flow through. It's amazing how Serres finds all this meaning in what seem like simple descriptions.
Right. It's like he's peeling back the layers.
Speaking of which...
Oh, you're going to talk about the colors.
Zola's use of color. So deliberate, especially red and black.
Yeah. What do you make of that?
Like that mine explosion. All that red, it's so vivid, almost violent in its description.
Exactly. And Serres points out, for Zola, red isn't just descriptive.
It's like symbolic, right?
Of passion, violence. Even the life force itself, which can be destructive just as much as it can be creative.
And black, then, would be?
The opposite. Death, rot, all that grime.
Threatening to consume everything.
It's in the slums, those descriptions of disease, even the way some characters are described, morally.
It's like he's made a whole visual language.
A color palette for these huge themes. Circulation, transformation, and, catastrophe.
He's not just telling a story, he's painting a picture.
a portrait of his time.
Complex and, honestly, kind of unsettling if you really look at it.
Oh, for sure. But that's what makes it so great, right? It makes you think.
Beautiful, yeah, but also kind of ugly, all mixed together.
And woven right into that, Serres says there are these characters, certain types, that Zola uses almost on purpose.
Oh, like archetypes.
Kind of. He talks about what he calls the excluded individual. They're always on the edges of society.
The orphans, the outcasts.
Yeah. Like Etienne Lantier in Germinal.
Right. He never fits in, keeps searching for a place he belongs.
And he ends up causing this huge upheaval.
Almost like he embodies all that chaos we were just talking about.
Exactly. Serres argues these characters are often catalysts.
For change.
Sometimes good, sometimes not. But they're showing what happens when you're cut off from those vital connections.
That flow of, like, energy, empathy. We need that, even if we don't realize it.
Without it, you become volatile, unpredictable.
A warning sign. Zola's showing us this is what happens when those systems break down, when people get left behind.
Exactly.
But there's a flip side.
All right. Okay. Serres points out another character type that Zola uses. The scientist. Or the observer.
The one who's trying to make sense of it all.
Yes. Like, Dr. Pascal.
In the book, by the same name.
Right. He's obsessed with his family history, making this scientific record.
And Serres is saying, that's like Zola himself.
Trying to find the patterns, the meaning, in all the chaos. It's like he's saying, look, I'm not just telling stories.
I'm running an experiment here.
Using fiction to understand what shapes our lives. And to really get that, we have to think about the when and where of Zola's world.
Historically, you mean?
Yeah, those big events like the Franco-Prussian War. They play into all this.
Which he shows so clearly in La Debacle. That book is brutal, the way it just upends everything.
And Serres connects that back to, believe it or not, the biblical flood.
Whoa.
Those primal fears, right? Societal collapse, but then renewal. These events, wars, revolutions, crashes... They wipe away the old order.
But leave behind what?
Devastation, sure, but also the possibility for something new. It's like Zola is saying, look, this is history, this ebb and flow, you can't escape it.
But you can at least try to understand it.
And that's where Serres gets really fascinating. He says, these anxieties, they're not just from back then, they're universal.
Timeless even.
People have always felt this fear of falling apart, the uncertainty. I mean, look at the world today.
Things are moving so fast, it's overwhelming.
And Serres is saying, by understanding how those anxieties played out before, how someone like Zola dealt with them,
we can see our own challenges differently.
Maybe even find some comfort. Like, hey, we've been here before. Humanity's been through this.
And we came out the other side. There's something kind of hopeful about that.
And that's the power of art. It reminds us we're not alone. So when I'm reading Zola, thinking about Serres, what am I looking for?
Good question.
He wants us to pay attention to the small stuff, the details, those symbols, those motifs.
That you might just skim over.
Right. But they're actually revealing these big ideas. Like, remember all that talk about color?
Red, black. Zola's favorites.
It's not just decorative, it's symbolic. Those colors are representing these huge forces constantly moving.
Like his own visual language to get these points across.
Exactly. He does it with names too, objects. Even the city itself is described this way. The trains in La Bête Humaine.
Oh man. Yeah, Jacques Lantier and his obsession. It's both creepy and really interesting.
That's Zola. And those trains, Serres says, they're not just transportation.
They stand for something bigger.
Modernity, technology, but also what happens when you lose control of that power?
Which you can tie right back to Jacques, right? His whole thing, that drive towards violence he can't escape.
It's like a runaway train. See, this is what Serres helps us do. He shows us how it's all connected. The characters, the symbols, what was going on in the world at the time.
It's a system.
The Zola system. And the more we understand those connections, the more brilliant it all seems.
It makes me want to reread everything, but like with new eyes.
Yes, that's what he'd want. Not just to read, but to really see it. Have those aha moments, look at the world differently because of it.
Okay, so we've got the tree, circulation, catastrophe, connection versus being disconnected, the biblical flood thing, colors, the excluded folks, Zola as this scientist observer. What are we missing?
One last big one. The role of the irrational.
Ooh, now we're talking Zola, Mr. Naturalism, doing the irrational.
Right. Seems wrong. But Serres argues Zola was super into the subconscious.
All that hidden stuff driving us in ways we don't get.
Because even those, what were they called? Thermodynamic principles. Those aren't just about physical energy.
It applies to our desires, our messed up impulses.
Right. It's about how much the outside world, those pressures can trigger things inside us. And then we get those cycles, that transformation. Sometimes it all goes boom.
So it's not enough to just look at the systems out there, but also what's going on in here.
It's both. That interplay between them.
Which is why those excluded characters are even more interesting. Because they're almost pure id, right? No filter.
That raw human nature we try to pretend isn't there.
But it's in all of us. Makes you think.
A little unsettling, right?
To think about all that darkness just under the surface of our nice, civilized world.
It is. But that's the point. Once you see it, you can start to deal with it. Maybe even, I don't know, use it for something better.
That's a lot to unpack. But I feel like you did a great job of explaining it all. So we're looking at all this, right? This mirror Zola's holding up, all messy and complicated. What do we do with this? What's the takeaway, Serres style?
See, the systems, that's huge for him. Not just the ones in the novels, the ones we live in now. He's like, hey, you might not be a coal miner back then, but you're in a family, you work somewhere, there's this whole global economy.
It's like you're always in something, even if you don't see it.
The flows are constant, energy, resources, even just information. It's all around us all the time.
Can't see the forest for the trees, as they say. But Serres, he's like, no, look closer, see both.
And once you see those connections, how it all fits together, you can't unsee it. You start noticing the consequences, the good and the bad, you know. Whether they meant to or not, these systems have effects.
And maybe knowing that helps us make better choices. Build systems that are fairer, that don't break down so easily.
That's the hope. He doesn't give a how-to guide, but he gives you a new way of looking. Like, okay, you get it. Progress, destruction, the whole cycle. What are you going to do about it?
Powerful stuff. Makes Zola feel less like old books, more like urgent, even now.
Exactly. That's the thing about literature, right? It breaks free of its own time. It's about those things that connect us no matter when or where.
Those anxieties, but also, like you said, the hopes we have. It's not just fancy writing, it's, what's that word? The human condition.
Yeah. And talking about it, thinking through Zola and Serres this way, we're not just getting better at reading, but at, being alive to the world.
Seeing those connections, understanding how it all works, even just a little bit. Maybe finding our own place in it, making it a little better where we can.
That's what makes a deep dive like this worth it. It's not about just knowing more stuff. It's that spark, that makes you want to ask more questions, look for the patterns, never stop connecting the dots.
And who knows what we'll find out there. So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep. Until next time.